Welcome to Spotlight TV. I'm your host, Emily Zubi, and today we have a good friend of mine, Wayne Baxter, who is the Senior Executive Manager at One Capital. And I know Wayne, and not only is he a great storyteller, but he's dynamic. He's a great business leader. We're going to talk a little bit of money, and so much more, and a podcast that he has that I will be a guest at. So I'm excited about that. The roles will be reversed. So with that, I introduce you to Wayne. Welcome, Wayne.
Emily, thank you for very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for mentioning the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, this is all about you. Spotlight is about you, your story. So take it away.
Well, let's start with the fact that I'm a Canadian from Canada, originally born in Toronto, Ontario, which is obviously the heart, the straw that stirs the drink, although the rest of Canada doesn't really like to hear that. I was adopted, and my family that adopted me moved me to Nova Scotia, to the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia, and that's where I was raised. And ultimately, as the story goes, I ended up living in the Canadian Rockies. Now, if you've never been to Banff, Alberta, if you ever want to go on I don't imagine you'd be too crazy about the winter. Are you a skier?
Yes, well, I'm a ski bunny.
Okay,
I have the best après ski clothes.
Okay.
I look like I'm a great skier.
Okay, well, Banff, Alberta is famous. Well, there's Lake Louise, Sunshine Village, Mount Norquay. Banff, Alberta, in the wintertime, if you're a skier, is Shangri-La. Summertime in Banff is spectacularly beautiful. So I lived there for 6 years. Most people go for 6 months. I knew a good thing. I stayed a lot longer. And in fact, when I left Banff and moved to Toronto, I was homesick for Banff for almost 6 more years. I remember watching TV, shots of Banff on TV after I moved back to Toronto, almost started crying. So my story, and in terms of my career, really was one of good fortune. I had my own construction company. And this is during the early 1990s, and Canada was in the midst of a bit of a recession. And so this one night, I'm out having pizza with a friend of mine at the most famous pizza brand in Canada is Pizza Pizza. So we're at the local
Very original.
Pizza 967-1111. Call Pizza Pizza. Hey. That was their thing. So, and my son to this day, still, every time we go back to Canada, that's the first place he goes to. Believe it or not, it's a thing. So anyway, we're at Pizza, and my friend Janet says, I just got a job offer to work for this investment firm, to do marketing work for them. But I can't take the job because she was a City of Toronto worker, and she couldn't take the job because if she did, she'd lose her benefits. But she was on a long-term disability. She said, I think you'd be great. And I went, really? So she arranged for me to be interviewed by the president of this company. Now, it turns out I used to listen to him on the radio when I was working. He used to be on the radio once a month on Fridays. A gentleman named Chris Reynolds, who, by the way, has a place down here in South Florida now. I used to listen to him. He's a really interesting guy. So I got an interview with Chris. And he said, well, what I'm looking for is somebody to do corporate marketing for me. And what I want you to do is call corporations and arrange for me to meet with them to talk about putting on lunch and learn workshops. And I looked at him and I said, and you're going to pay me for that? He said, oh, yeah. I can't find anybody that can do it. I said, you'd be kidding. So my 30-year anniversary, Emily, believe it or not, today is October the 3rd. My 30-year anniversary is 3 days from now.
Nice.
When he hired me, October the 6th.
Congratulations.
Isn't that cool? So whoever knew I'd be with you 30 years later, but here we are. And shout out to Chris Reynolds. I love you, Chris. Not more I can say. He helped me out a lot. Let's just put it that way.
Those relationships, let me just say that because that is so rare. And I love to hear that. And I always tell, I did 7 industries in my career and rose to the top of each one of them. And what I love about hanging with you is, it brings back my Wall Street days.
Yeah, that's
And the
right.
thinking, and we get to talking, and I love it. But that idea of the relationship and
Oh,
being with a
I
I mean,
cherish those
30 years.
relationships.
That's I mean, you don't hear that anymore.
Well, remember I was telling you about living in Banff? Well, I made a whole slew of friends in Banff. And I will tell you, those friendships probably mean more to me today, 40 years later. I cherish those friendships. They're almost sacred now. Some of those friends, I keep in touch with them to this day.
That's great.
So Chris ended up hiring me. And lo and behold, I was good at what I did. We ended up getting a lot of large accounts, big brand name like Monsanto, like a large company would bring Chris in and he would do lunch and learn workshops. And my job was to arrange for these people that wanted to talk to him to come and see him. And I was exceptionally good at it. And I did that for the first 3 or 4 years. That's all I did. And then I got him a radio show because he was on the radio. That's where I heard about him. Got him a radio show, and that went well. And then this little company in the West in Toronto evolved into what you would call in the U.S. a national broker dealer. Became a large cross Canada company of financial advisors. So Chris ultimately had to give up his role. And long story short, we had an agreement that if he ever sold his practice, I would get the first opportunity to buy it. And that's what happened. So I ended up buying his practice. And, obviously I went through all the courses and training and all of that. And slowly but surely, I took over the practice. And obviously he was no longer on the radio, and the relationships I'd formed, talking about relationships, the relationships I formed with the people in the radio industry. One of my clients introduced me to her mother, who was a sales rep with the largest radio station in Canada. When she turned 65, they basically made her retire. And she moved to here's a story for you, you'll like this one. She moved to a local radio station as a sales rep. Now, the story about this radio station is interesting. You ever heard of a radio show or TV show called WKRP in Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Possibly? Okay, well, believe it or not, apparently, so the story goes, the writer for that, that wrote the original script for WKRP in Cincinnati, used the radio station in Oakville, Ontario as his narrative, as the muse for WKRP in Cincinnati, a seniors radio station for seniors, older music. And I ended up my client got a job there, and she said to me one day, I got this job at this radio station in Oakville. I think, it's going to be really good. It's all 50 plus listeners. And I jokingly said to her, well, Joanne, you'll have to get me a show. I said it kind of tongue in cheek, right? 2 weeks later in my office, and the receptionist calls through and she says, I got a Joanne on the phone here. I said, put her through. Hey, Joanne, how you doing? Wayne, you start in 2 weeks. Start what? Your radio show. I got you a radio show. You're going to be on Saturday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. It's going to be wonderful.
Love it.
And I'm like, really? So I take a friend of mine because I'm like, I can't do a radio show by myself. So I took a colleague of mine. We went out and met with all the management of this radio station, including my friend Joanne, my client. And they're telling me, she's telling everybody about how great we're going to be. And I looked at all these guys who have been in the radio industry in Toronto for 20, 30 years. I recognize some of the names. And I looked at them, I said, so who's going to host this radio show? And the guy looked at me and he went, you are. And I'm like, perfect. So there we are. We started the radio show. It was called Right on the Money. And at first, a little while, my friend.
Did you ring the bell? Like, what's his
No.
name?
Oh, we got in trouble one time, though, because remember, the radio station is meant for, they played big band music, and it was, they had an older demographic. This is back in 2003, 2004. So we were in there early in the morning, and there was a young guy behind the board running the board for and everything, and they had to put music on. So they had like infomercials, and then there was a break, and then there was the news, and then they would play music, and then it would lead into Right on the Money. So the young guy was trying to find a song to play. So being a good Canadian boy that I was, I said, well, how about American Woman by Guess Who? Because it was on the playlist.
Oh, that's why I love
I got
you.
a phone call on Monday morning from the station. I got a bit of a lecture about how inappropriate that was. I thought it was perfect, but they didn't see the humor in it.
I'm a rock and roll girl.
Yeah, me,
I get
me,
it.
hey,
I
I
love
could,
it.
me too. I thought it was ideal, but they didn't see it that way. So I ended up doing that show ultimately for about 8 years, believe it or not, Emily, and right on the money on AM 740 in Toronto. Was started on Saturdays, ultimately and went to Sunday. So I was on from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. week after week, year after year, until finally, well, I ended up moving to LA. So that's a story unto itself.
You have the history of sticking with it. I mean,
yeah. Well,
I
yeah,
like that.
I'm a almost to a fault. Will stick with something probably longer than I should.
Right on the money.
Right on the money on AM 740.
And that's a great title for a show, for it.
Yeah.
Does it still exist?
No, it was just, well, basically it was mine. I ended up giving up the show, and colleagues at the same company as mine took it over, but it never really went anywhere after that. But I had a lot of fun, met a lot of people. Got to become way more familiar with the radio industry, the good, the bad, and the ugly there. And made some friends there. Actually, my contact, I'll share his name if he ever sees this, Steve Shyman at AM 740, says to me, my cousin moved out to LA. I should introduce you to him. He lives somewheres near where you're moving to. Ultimately, we lived in Malibu. We moved from Toronto to Malibu, California.
Rough life.
Yeah,
well, Wayne, rough life.
Again, there's always a story behind everything. So anyway, so I tell Steve I'm moving to Malibu, and he says, "Well, I got a cousin of mine who's an accountant. He's out there somewhere, Santa Barbara, like somewhere." And I went, "Oh, well, you'll have to introduce us, right?" So once I get all settled, I guess I reached out to Steve because I consider him a friend, and he said, "Oh yeah, you." Don't forget, I gotta introduce you to my cousin. So he sends me his cousin's address. And believe it or not, Emily, his cousin, Mel, my accountant, was literally a block away from my office in Westlake Village. So Mel, I met him right away, and he became my accountant. He's been my accountant to this day.
Nice.
Another Canadian. But yeah, we lived in Malibu for about 5 years, and eventually we decided to move up to Westlake Village, which is I'm a hop, skip, and a jump from where our One Capital Management head office, which is also in Westlake Village.
I gotta make a visit. I used to go out there when I did the studio business for MTV, and used to go quite a bit to the West
Well, you
Coast.
ever come out? There's lots of places though. If you know a little bit about LA, I had the pleasure of my first couple tours to LA. We did our 10-year wedding anniversary out there. My wife and I brought the kids. We did the whole, West Coast tour down from San Francisco, Big Sur. We stopped in Monterey and did the aquarium and all of that. Stayed at the Big Sur Lodge. Went to the Hearst Castle. That's quite a place. You've never been there, you got to check that one out. And then ended up staying right in Santa Monica. And took a road trip out to Malibu one day just to go to the beach, and thought that was really nice. And then, being a Canadian, I spent a lot of my summers and my vacation times in Prince Edward Island, which is one of the most beautiful places in Canada to visit for the summertime. But after a while, you go to the same place over and over again. It's time to mix things up. And so I decided to reach out to a real estate agent in Malibu, and she found me a house to rent for the month. So the summer of 2010, I spent a month in Malibu, and I loved it so much. If 1 month is good, 2 months would be better. And I ended up the next summer, we stayed in Broad Beach, which is another famous neighborhood in Malibu, and we rented a house for 2 months. And I was on the beach with my wife, and I remember this. I can remember it like it was last week. There's this older gentleman, those big sunglasses, long hair, like almost like a mullet, like a hockey player, but old, gray hair, and he's trudging along the beach in front of us, jogging. I'd call it trudging, but whatever it was he was doing there. And I looked at my wife and I said, you know, I do not want to look like him when I end up moving here. In other words, I didn't want to be slightly on the verge of becoming decrepit. So, and I guess at some point I said to her, you know, if I could ever find somebody that could set me up, I would move here.
Yeah. And lo and behold.
And lo and behold, I'm socializing, you know, getting to know people in Malibu, and I run up. I made the mistake of putting on a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey hat, my favorite hockey team, and this guy came up and made a not so friendly comment about my favorite hockey team, and I looked over my shoulder and went, "Who said that?" Well, who said that was somebody who's also a very important person in my life, a gentleman by the name of Don McDonald, who is the founder and managing partner with One Capital Management, the firm I'm now with.
I never heard this part of the story. I think this is great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, like we talked about, we're Canadians. Like he's from Winnipeg. I'm from Toronto. We talked about hockey. We weren't talking about work or business.
Right.
But I kept his card. You know, we come to Toronto, I'll take you to a hockey game. He said, yeah, if you come to LA, I'll take you to a Kings game. And that was kind of where we left it. Fast forward to October 20th, which happens to be my now late mother's birthday. I'm reading this article in the Wall Street Journal about how a couple senators, Mike Lee from Utah, I think he was Republican, and Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, had come up with this idea of a new visa program for immigrants that if they bought real estate in the U.S., they could get a visa. Now, that went nowhere, just to be clear, but I read the article. And if it wasn't for that article, you and I wouldn't be sitting here today. So I read this article, and the first thing I think about is my friend Don in L.A.
Time to call him.
Exactly. Great minds think alike.
Ring, ring.
Well, the thing of it is like, how did you move there anyway? And so one thing led to another, and he said to me, you know, our firm is licensed to trade securities, you know, stocks, bonds, ETFs, that sort of, in both countries, Canada and the U.S. They're like a unicorn. There are very few firms in North America that can do what capital management does. And he says, if you're looking for a change in lifestyle, why don't you come work with me? So I went to my wife and told her about it, and she said to me this famous line. She says, well, if we don't do it, we're going to spend the rest of our life wondering, what if? And then the kicker. And she says, well, and besides the point, if you fall flat on your face, somebody back in Canada will hire you. You know, with that kind of a vote of confidence, who could... No, obviously my 14-year-old daughter and 11-year-old son at the time weren't overly as excited about this whole idea, but we decided, well, you're coming along anyway. And my real big goal of all of this was, you know, I want to get my kids U.S. citizenship. And obviously myself and my wife too, but I thought it would be great. My kids could live and work anywhere in North America, not just,
wonderful,
you know, within 100 miles of the U.S. border on the other side. So that was kind of the big picture motivation. Like, what would compel me, aside from not having to shovel snow anymore, you know, yes, that's a confession I'll make right now, of course. But
well, kids are the big motivator. My son, when he was in high school, he said, I want to go to Occidental and study out there. And we made a trip, and he saw I fell in love with the campus. He fell in love with the campus, and we stayed in Malibu for a couple of days. And him and I just wonderful, wonderful memories. You know, the mistake I made as a parent with visiting, you know, colleges and all that was buying too many T-shirts, because in the end,
down in Venice Beach? Were you down in Venice Beach? There's every T-shirt shop in the world down there.
I was buying Occidental mom T-shirts. But yes, we just bought way too many.
You want to buy a T-shirt, go down to Venice Beach. You'll see, trust me, you'll go home with a bushel of them. So that's ultimately what happened. We continued our conversations, and I went to Chris Reynolds, the gentleman I talked about earlier, and broke the news to him that I was leaving the firm and moving to Malibu, and that's what we did. And the idea being was I would become a cross-border financial advisor, and that's what's happened. So I now have a practice, not entirely. I have some clients in Canada that are only Canadian regular folks, and I have some U.S. only clients, but a good portion of my clients are what we call cross-border clients, Emily. They're either residents of Canada or the U.S., and they have investment accounts in both countries, or investment accounts in the country from outside of where they live. Or another example I could give you is I have a client who's in the entertainment industry, an actor who lives in Southern California, and he inherited some money, a death in the family in Canada, and he inherited a sizable amount of money. And the issue was this, is that the money was in Canada, and when you're a U.S. resident, you really can't open up a brokerage account to invest that money in Canada. You have to bring it to the U.S. And typically, if you go to a U.S. investment firm, don't need to name names, but we can just, the ABCDs
Right.
of that industry. You go to them and say, I've inherited a sizable amount of money in Canada. They'll welcome you with open arms, like no question. But there's a barrier to entry, and there are two. One is the cost of moving the money from the Canadian bank account to the U.S. bank account can be rather an eye-popping surprise. The other thing is that you have to convert that money to U.S. dollars. And right now, the Canadian dollar is hovering somewhere right around 74 cents U.S. So, forget about dollar for dollar, old school par, which is what he used to talk about. There's something called purchasing power parity, which is, what will $1 Canadian buy in U.S.? And that's in the low 80s, 80 cent U.S. So $1 Canadian probably get you around 83 cents U.S. worth of goods. Canadian dollar right now is trading around 74 cents. So you're taking quite a haircut if you sell your Canadian dollars today.
Mm-hmm.
So the great thing about our firm is that we can bring those Canadian dollars across the border and keep them in Canadian dollar denominated securities. We can put it in anything from a cash account to a fully invested stock and bond portfolio in Canadian dollars, invested in Canadian security. We're a rarity in this.
That is a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly.
Model.
Yeah, 100%. So, and we can we can turn the tables completely the other way, where you have someone who's got the opposite experience of, relocating to Canada or in Canada, inheriting money from the U.S. We can bring U.S. dollars across the border to Canada and keep them in U.S. dollars. So it works either way.
Love it.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I provide investment wealth management services through One Capital. And what we do really, Emily, is help our clients grow, protect, and ultimately distribute their wealth. So when someone comes to us, we're not a brokerage firm. So we're not just trading, we're actually, clients come in, we sit down, and I have really three questions. A, can I help you? And the second question is, are we compatible? In other words, do we get along?
Mm-hmm.
And three, do you want to take my advice? And if the answers are yes, yes, and yes, then we have a great way to start. We can start working together, and we'll work to put the complete financial plan for that client together, whether they're on Vancouver Island, Edmonton, Alberta, Toronto, Ontario, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Fredericton, New Brunswick, wherever across Canada you can think of, or anywhere from the Pacific Northwest to here in South Florida, or in Southern California, Orange County, San Diego, LA, Bay Area, Silicon Valley. I have a lot of clients in Silicon Valley, the Midwest, Ohio, New England states, all up and down the coast. I have clients literally all over the country. We do the same thing put together really well thought out wealth management strategies, and we'll connect those clients as needed with the subject matter experts that they're going to need, the estate planning attorney, obviously the tax advisor. And if we're helping a family relocate, say, from Canada to the U.S., obviously the first person is the immigration attorney. That's really the first thing. You have to figure out, can you immigrate here and how? And then you get into tax planning. But there are, you have to have a property and casualty advisor, insurance advisor, obviously real estate, mortgages, real estate agents. And we put the whole team together for the family when they relocate here.
It's turnkey.
It's turnkey, and that works the other way around. So if someone's, actually, I was going to talk to you about this after, but I met somebody this morning who's told me he's thinking he wants to move to Canada. Yeah. And I'll be honest here, we're in October of not. There's an election here within about a month, right? So this is when we start getting the I want to move to Canada conversations start to come up more often. So not surprising, I had one of those conversations this morning. Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears real quickly as we start to wrap up. But one of the things that we're doing is our leadership legacy, 15 years, and a coffee table book of leaders. And the one question that I always find fascinating is, what is your secret sauce to success?
Those who fail to plan to fail. That's what I'll start with. And I'm glad you asked that. That's a great question, because it does, there is some God-given thing. We all have traits and gifts that we're given that help us along the way. But one of the best pieces of advice I got from my friend again, Chris, was to put together a plan for yourself, not just for your clients, but you need to have a plan. So starting back in the late 90s, he actually gave me the outline, a template for called Systemizing Your Business. And I started filling out the Systemizing Your Business plan back, I think the first one I did was in the late 90s. And every year I would update it. From the time I was, just starting out, like being a wealth management advisor, and I would have like a 3-year goal. Because he told me, if you don't write it down, it's not real. So anyone who, watching us today or listening, if you have any dreams or goals that you really want to achieve, put it down on paper. Because if you have it up here, it's not real. So write it down. And I remember the first time he ever taught me about that, he told me about this lady he knew. She one of her big 3 goals is she wanted to own a Jaguar. And, something she aspired to do. That was her thing. So she wrote it down, like one of her goals. So he said, you got to write it down. So the secret to success is write down your dreams, and don't be afraid to dream. That's another thing that people are afraid to do. Oh, that ain't going to happen. I can't do that. That won't happen. Nonsense. If you want something, write it down, because once you make it, once you memorialize it, it becomes real. So that to me was something I did, and I did that all the way through. And I can tell you, the last one I did before I moved to LA, I could show it to you. I hit all of my marks on that. And then I moved here and I started over again. And I can tell you, basically, I've done it again.
That's a great secret to success. I love it.
Write down your goals. I will tell you right now, that's the most important. Don't be afraid to dream. The self-negative talk that people are victims of. Oh, that can't happen. I can't do this. That won't happen. No. Write it down.
Love it. I can't wait to get on your podcast.
Yeah, I can't either.
A minute left. I want, real quickly, your podcast. Where can anyone catch it? Give us the details.
3 Questions with Wayne Baxter. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on Spotify, SoundCloud. There are 72 episodes waiting to be, and a lot of them are cross-border related for, the Canadian moving to the U.S. Not all of them are. And we have just moved into our new studio, calling it Studio One, of course, with One Capital Management. And we've just started recording a new batch. We've just recorded the first 5 episodes. Some really great guests. One of them is from here. A little taste of you'll look for is we're talking about the 3 questions you should ask before purchasing a yacht.
Well, FYI Yachts is our client and sponsor.
There you go.
So we're going to look at leaders. We have an event tonight on a private yacht. So private jets and yachts, that's my specialty. So
well, we nailed that one. We've got several more lined up. So I encourage everybody to listen and like and follow the 3 Questions with Wayne Baxter podcast.
Well, I look forward to being on and
you're going to be there
turning
sooner
the
than later
here, and that's going to be great. So thank you so much. It is so wonderful having you. I learned a lot. I mean, there was a lot that I didn't know.
We kind of talked a little bit about money there.
Yeah, we talked about money. We talked about money. We talked about goals. We talked about all those things, and legacy, really. a legacy of relationships, which is, I mean, I hope that, 10 years from now, we sit down and we have this conversation.
That's the
We
goal.
both met all
100%.
our goals. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week on Spotlight TV. Have a wonderful week. And remember that 50 Shades of Pink is 36 days away. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We are so proud to partner with our 305 Pink Pack. You saw Rosemary on the show. Check it out. Join us on social. And thank you to Community Newspapers.